You're listening to Working in Oncology, a podcast and video show that spotlights oncology practice staff and industry influencers who work behind the scenes to shape the future of oncology. The more knowledge the oncology community shares with each other, the more we all grow. Let's get into the show.
Welcome to Working in Oncology. I'm your co-host, Alicia Evans, and I'm here today with Dr. Dizon, Professor of Medicine at Brown University.
Morning.
Good morning. Dr. Dizon, thank you so much for joining us today.
Happy to be here.
Welcome, and I'm excited for our conversation. I think a lot of our listeners dabble in social media. They use Facebook and Twitter to keep up with their with their family and friends, maybe their crush from high school, but they don't really think of it as something to be used for patient care. And I think you're going to be able to speak a little bit on that today. Right. But before we get into the show, can you tell our viewers a little bit about you, your background, and what you do?
Sure. I am a medical oncologist. I've been practicing for the better part of 20 years. I trained at Sloan Kettering for fellowship and then developed a specialty in breast and pelvic malignancies. Currently, I'm the director of the Breast and Pelvic Malignancies Program at Lifespan Cancer Institute, which is here in Providence, Rhode Island. And in that sort of rubric, I treat breast cancers, ovarian, cervix, uterine cancers, and I also treat soft tissue sarcomas here. I'm a professor of medicine at Brown University and head the community outreach and engagement program at the Cancer Center at Brown University.
Awesome. Sounds like you have a wide range of experience.
I should also say I helped form this group, and I call it a crowdsourced organization, but it's called the Collaboration for Outcomes Using Social Media in Oncology.
Interesting.
And we just had our first meeting.
Oh, great. Sounds really interesting. So the collaboration for, can you repeat that, please?
Sure. It's the Collaboration for Outcomes Using Social Media in Oncology.
That's a very interesting topic that I'd love to get into.
Well, I think the little name for it is even better. It's called Cosmo.
Cosmo. It's catchy. It's catchy. I like it.
Yes.
So tell me a little bit about Cosmo. So using social media to improve patient outcomes, and how do you envision that?
Well, it's actually not to improve patient outcomes specifically. The whole goal that we had was to make the case that stakeholders, especially within the cancer space, should engage with the community at large. And in terms of social media, I mean a worldwide community in conversations that are happening, that it is worthwhile to do this. And we sort of formed together and we wrote papers together before we actually named it something. But, best practice, providing guidance on how to do it, sort of where and should the interface between professional use and personal use, like you just mentioned, comes into play, and where education and engagement with people directly not under your care, where that line is, and where for people who are also under your care, and how to sort of traverse that ground as well.
That's a very interesting topic and something that needs to be explored, because there's probably some ethical questions in there and guidelines that you want to stay.
Best practices for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So this group was formed, and you've recently had a conference.
Yes, we had our first. It was supposed to be live, but during COVID, it became a virtual meeting. We just had it on April 8th and 9th.
Excellent. And so what are some key takeaways, do you think, that at the practice level, what are some things that we can do every day to start, I guess, using social media more?
Mhm. Well, I think one of the biggest things that was mentioned during the conference, and we had quite a a diverse panel. We had physicians, we had physician advanced practice providers, we had patients, and we had patient advocates on the
Oh,
panel. We had researchers on this panel as well. And I think one of the things that struck me was that there should be uh, no one should be forced to engage on social media. So a lot of best practices are about listening,
mm,
joining social media and just watching a conversation take place. And someone actually made the point, there's no use in joining if you're not going to engage. And so much of engagement is listening to other viewpoints. There was also this point about how to avoid an echo chamber. And someone on our panel, who's also a founder out in Utengen, who is a co-founder of a social media analytics platform called Simpler, made the point that an echo chamber is defined by the lack of diversity in voices. And I thought that was really, really crystal clear. Another point that came out was sort of um, uh, the patient and the doctor perspectives, and how you do need to respect that on social media. So this whole notion of, quote, friending patients that you are personally caring for um, should not be, or should be done with great caution, because it is not a platform to discuss individual situations, and it is not a platform to provide medical advice. And I think that is one of the biggest and most crucial lessons that people should take away from this, is that there is a way to professionally use social media and respect the relationships and your institutional um, policies, but also to respect who you are in your role, and especially in your role as society sees it. So I think that that was also really very interesting.
understood. So there's a responsibility to the patient and a responsibility
Absolutely.
to the community.
Correct. And how to sort of traverse both of those. Yeah.
Excellent. So people are very hesitant to use social media.
Mhm.
So let's break it down into small bits, right? So why should a practice engage in social media?
Well, I think what it ends up being is there is so much people just see the dangers of social
Mm-hmm.
media. People recognize that there are potential positive use cases. In fact, we did a, um, a survey of clinical trialists in one of the cancer research groups called SWOG, Cancer Research Network. And this was done by my colleague, Mina Sedrak. And his question was really simple, and I think it gets to your point. Where do you see the role of social media in clinical trials and getting people to sign up for trials? And these investigators who designed trials and ran them said, oh, the potential is absolutely there to sort of do the outreach, to explain it, to encourage people to sign up for a trial, or at least just to get more information about them. But the same thing came back. you know um, I would be weary about doing it myself, because I would be weary about getting pushback, or I don't want to be dragged in to this conversation where I have to defend myself. And also, I see this as a potential danger zone, because I don't want patients telling me about their stories on social media, because then I don't want to have to respond to that. And then it was more, I have so much during my day already. I don't have time to do this. This sounds like more work on my plate. And why would I do this? And then frankly, people were saying, I don't have time. I don't have time to log in and do all this stuff. and do this. It's like when I leave my office, I want to just leave my office. I don't want to have to log in to do this. So all of these barriers are leading to this huge segment of the professional oncology community, and quite frankly, I think all of the stakeholder communities not engaging and not aware of what's being discussed, and not, and if you think about how we interface, right, our conferences are geared towards target audiences. Those target audiences never really merge. We have the American Society for Clinical Oncology annual meeting, and the American Association for Cancer Research meeting is going on now. The target audience of those conferences are clinicians and researchers in oncology, and we can get credit for attending those meetings. Patients are very interested in these meetings, but they're not the target audience. And if you look at the things that our advocacy groups are meeting, the target audience is not the physicians in the cancer space. They are speaking to patients, caregivers, advocates within their own communities, And the only times when you can actually hear each other crosstalk is on social media,
So
And
that
so
opportunity for collaboration is huge.
it is huge. And in fact, that's sort of one of the lessons that we try to promote in Cosmo. So I was called out when I tweeted Cosmo's meeting because the target audience was physicians, advanced practice providers, nurses, social workers, all of these folks in the cancer space. And someone was like, "Are patients allowed to attend?" I was like, "Absolutely, you can attend." And they're like, "Would you consider maybe making us one of your target audiences?" And I was like, "That's brilliant." So we actually added patients, advocates, and caregivers as part of the target audience, even if they couldn't get credit for it.
But they were still a part of the conversation.
They were 1000% a part of the conversation.
Mm-hmm. I mean, because honestly, these conversations are happening online, on Twitter, on Facebook, and sometimes the information shared is not accurate.
Correct. And in fact, Sylvia Chow, who's at the NIH, did a talk for us on, misinformation during the COVID-19 pandemic and how it relates to oncology. Yeah, because it is huge. And she made the point that, misinformation is more easily and more frequently shared than the truth. And I think part of that is the truth can be inaccessible. When you're talking about a new pathway in oncology, or when you're talking about a new drug, or you're talking about a new trial, so often we get caught up in the lingo of medicine, whereas those things that are being touted as untrue are housed in stories. A friend of a friend died of the vaccine. This is why you shouldn't take it. Is more clickable than a phase 3 trial showed an overall response rate of 40%.
Absolutely. I mean, what's going to sell papers?
Correct. And and I don't think that's how we don't do that well in academia. I was fortunate enough to have chaired for the American Society of Clinical Oncology, their communications committee, and it was eye-opening because we had to, one of our tasks was to look at all the new research being presented at our annual meeting and identify the stories that would be of interest to the lay public, which are very different than what should be, highlighted for a scientific audience. They're not the same thing.
No.
So
absolutely. What is the saying? It's something like, a lie can travel the world before the truth even puts its shoes on in the morning.
Right. Well, there was even this idea in, evidence-based medicine that from the time a positive phase 3 trial makes its way to standard of care practice is measured in years. It takes that long to change how we practice. So now you think about, right, misinformation that spreads like wildfire through the internet. And, case in point, the mRNA vaccines that are used against COVID-19. The false narrative is this science was approved too quickly, that this technology was, was developed too quickly without realizing that this work of using an mRNA protein or an mRNA fragment to induce an immune reaction has been decades in development.
It's not really a new.
It's absolutely not new. And, but the false narrative is this came out of nowhere and now we're injecting this into our body and we know nothing about it. And I'm like, really? There have been companies formed well before this pandemic to try to harness the power of mRNA technology.
What are some best practices or techniques that you have found work when combating this false information?
Well, I think that's one of the things that is it's an ongoing discussion, and I think this is one of the thoughts that Cosmo, I think, can help sort of either develop an idea to sort of test in the real world or not. But Dr. Chow had made the point that misinformation is best addressed in that office conversation between a doctor and a patient. But it means a doc needs to devote time to explaining why something is false. So what made me wonder about that is like all of these efforts across, the world to combat misinformation, how well are we doing when we create these public health campaigns? If the only people who are reading it are those people who don't believe the narrative, then it's an echo chamber.
Yeah.
Whereas those folks who believe in that false narrative, they're finding their own sources, and that's what they're looking at. So it is interesting. But what was interesting to me is that I have a very active TikTok account.
Oh,
I do.
and we're gonna have to include the link to that TikTok.
You should. But I and others are on that, and some are more confrontational than I choose to be. But I highlighted a story recently about how 1 in 3 people who survive COVID are getting a diagnosis of a neurological or a psychiatric condition within the first 6 months since their diagnosis. And that, 1 to 2 out of every 10 people who had this happen, it's their first diagnosis. So they didn't come into COVID with a pre-existing depression, but they're being diagnosed with it for the first time as they're recovering. It sort of gets into this idea of this syndrome of long haul COVID is real, but what was interesting about that is that it got over 100,000 views, which, I think is really interesting.
That's some great numbers.
Yeah, but it's also the discussions that people have engaged with. You got people sort of, claiming the pandemic isn't real and claiming the vaccine is dangerous, and then you're seeing people engage in sort of, framing that. But the idea that you can say something, make it relatable, and then latch on the source of the information. I walked away thinking, I wonder if people engage more if you include a source. So say you had 2 two TikToks. One where you're saying this is false and this is why, and you left it at that. You had the second saying this is false and this is why, and this is where you can read more about it. Which one would prompt more engagement? So I think it's a really testable idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would love to see some numbers. Maybe I'll try that myself.
Yeah, I mean, I think
we can.
I think it is a really interesting concept, and this is one of the ideas that came out of Cosmo, actually.
Excellent.
Mm-hmm.
And so, when we're talking about social media, we mean Facebook, Twitter. Is there a particular platform that you recommend is more effective than the other?
It depends on who you're trying to reach.
Okay.
But it also depends on which platform you feel most comfortable in. What I would say is that whichever the platform you are looking at, take the time to test it out. Take the time to look at the conversations, to see who's on it, to see what's being, what's floating to the top and who's engaging in those conversations. And if it's something that you feel an affinity for, then it is worth that small investment in time to sort of figure out how this whole thing works. My social media activities span Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. But what I would also say, and this came out in Cosmo as well, there's value and there's importance in being authentic. So engaging in social media to sort of develop a brand or to promote yourself as an oncologist, as a surgeon, or as an advocacy group, that's not going to work well, because I do believe on social media people can tell if you're being authentic. They also can tell what's entertaining, but for purposes of professional use, they can sense authenticity, and that also extends to ensuring that people are aware. The perspective you have, is it informed by things you're doing? So conflicts of interest need to be quite clear. So my use is, I use it sort of cross platforms to reach different audiences, but you'll see the same person across all of those media. There's no, oh, this is who he is on TikTok, but this is who he is on Instagram, and this is who he is on Facebook. So I do a lot of cross-platform posting. And the reason I actually explored TikTok was, the ability to make short 15 to 60-second videos was genius, because on other platforms, that leads to better engagement. Something visual, something short form video, or even a picture, is far more engaging than just text.
Yes, absolutely. This pandemic has caused me to spend a lot more time on the internet than I would like, and on Twitter. And these videos are pretty catchy, and I can see them. They're engaging, and I can see a patient gravitating towards, okay, quick bite of information, and I can take it with me.
Yeah, so I mean, this whole idea of like visual abstracts, for example, I mean, there's a reason that I think there's so much interest, because you're then forced. It's like, saying what you need to say in 280 characters, right? There's, the attention span, doesn't last for 30 minutes. And it certainly doesn't last for 2 hours before you start to wander. But if you can sit there and look at a picture and follow what's being said, that's actually more engaging than putting a paper in front of people. And same thing with video. If you can just, what is the most important take home here? What's the message here? And if you can do that in a very short video, then I think that is more engaging.
Okay, so we're just getting started on social media. I'm brand new. I should first start by exploring the platforms, right? So maybe go to Twitter, maybe go to Facebook and check out the search bar
Mhm.
and maybe type in oncology.
Mhm.
See what's floating up to the top, see what people are talking about.
Yep. Yeah,
Uh,
and I think the best way that people sign up or sort of figure it out, and I would actually encourage your group to do this, is if there's a big meeting that you go to or are interested in, then following the hashtag, which is really that number sign followed by whatever the conference tag is a great way to to follow it. And for right now, I'm actually following the AACR meeting, the American Association for Cancer Research 2021 tag. So it's hashtag AACR 2021. And you can see the abstracts that are being discussed
oh,
and that are being promoted on social media. And, apparently there was just a very big lung cancer trial. And the presenting author was on Twitter, explaining the abstract in a series of tweets and the background of how this
wow.
study went about. This is the kind of access that I'd love to see more often on social media, is that people presenting data are actually on there and are discussing it. So he's not only, pushing out information, but he's also responding to people. And I think that's the bidirectionality that I think is really critical, because for so long in our meetings, we were only talking to each other. But on social media, it's highly democratized, let's say. So following it around a conference is a great way to get exposure. But the other way is, say you're interested in genetics, or you're interested in, breast cancer or prostate cancer, or, leadership. There's a whole collection of hashtags where you can filter down the billions of tweets that are going on every day and filter it down to the ones you're most interested in. So in general, if you just want to see what are people talking about in healthcare, each CSM, or healthcare social media, is a great tab to sort of filter. Breast cancer has one, BCSM, gynecologic cancers has one, and GYN CSM. There are radiation oncology journal clubs. There's even women in radiation oncology there that meet on Twitter and have tweet chats.
Oh, so there's a niche for everything.
There really is. And my friend Matt Katz, who's a radiation oncologist and also helped form this group that formed Cosmo, he was actually the person who really got us all started on the use of cancer hashtags. And, he published in the Journal of the American Medical Association, or JAMA, on the use of these hashtags in oncology. And we've really taken it because it's a way for us to follow the conversations that we're interested in and for the communities that we serve. Yeah.
I love it. So research doesn't have to be tucked away in academic circles only. With social
Mm-hmm.
media, we can make this research available and known to so many more people.
Correct.
Even a
Correct.
patient, a friend of a patient, can access it readily on Twitter. I love
Yeah.
this openness of information. I love
Well,
data sharing. And
I think the thing is that there's still a large contingency of professionals who don't believe the data should be that open, that they should be the gatekeepers of the data. Unless I get it from a source that I trust, then you shouldn't be reading that anyway. And unfortunately, that's just not how the world works today. People, because of the internet, the gates have opened. We're no longer the arbiters of what is good data and what isn't good data. We're no longer, the people who present the papers for our, people under our care to read. They are getting the papers themselves. There are people who survived sarcoma or lung cancer, and they are becoming medical experts of their own right, because their own experience has given them the expertise in the medicine that affected them the most. you know so there's just there's a very rich conversation that probably could be even richer if more if we stopped ignoring it.
Exactly. I love it. And it's free, right? It's pretty free to it's free to sign up for these platforms.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just for educating the community about cancer care and cancer FAQs. It's also about listening to what's new in the field, and also connecting with your coworkers or connecting with your colleagues.
1000%, right. And
So,
also, I think the networking thing is huge, actually, and networking with people who are not who you never met before. I've made so many connections via Twitter, and I collaborate with so many people I've never met in real life. So I coined a term, and I'm waiting for Webster's to pick it up and everything. But Twitter friends. This is what I have. I have friends I've made on Twitter, and I call them Twiends. Twitter friends, Twiends.
Twins.
But this is really what they are. They're twins, and I can't wait to meet them in person. And having met people that I met on Twitter, there's just this very broad sense of familiarity and friendship. And it's like, oh my gosh, I feel like I've known you forever. And it's because you've engaged with them on social media.
So increasing that connection.
1000%. And I think the social media connections, anyone who has been treated for cancer and go into these online communities know there's a camaraderie that's very real. It's not a traditional support group. It's actually richer than that, because not only are you getting support, but you're educating and you're being educated at the same time. I even have people who found me because of social media, where they put out to their communities, I was just diagnosed with breast cancer and it's been 6 weeks and I still haven't seen a surgeon. And someone saw that and took it to their oncologist, who then reached out to me, and then we reached out to them.
Wow.
I mean, it's a living community without borders.
I love it. We should. So you'd highly recommend that anyone at the practice level would start the process of getting involved in social media.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't think we're at a place where ignoring it is a real option now. I don't think you can ignore it.
Absolutely. Yeah. This has been a really great conversation. I want to thank you so much for joining us today. I do like to end our calls and our interviews on a kind of happy note. So looking into the future, what do you want to see in the future of oncology and social media?
Well, I think what I would like to see is a more widespread adoption, where more people are engaging in conversations, but in a way that respect is assumed, and that the conversations reflect the diversity of opinions in just a much more profound way. Because I think we can learn from each other, and I would love more people to start learning that way.
Well, we'll all hope for that. That'll improve the workplace and it'll improve care for patients. Absolutely.
I think so, exactly.
And we can communicate or respectfully.
1000%. It's all about respect, really.
Awesome. So if any of our viewers or listeners want to follow up or just want to reach out to you, what's the best way?
Well, so I'm on Clubhouse.
Okay.
But, I think if you want to reach out to me, follow me on social media, whatever platform you're interested in looking at, TikTok, Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. I use the same username. It's at Dr. Don S. Dizon. And I think on TikTok, you can only direct message me via Instagram, so it'll send you to my
Okay.
Instagram profile. But I've been getting quite a bit of messages on Instagram, and I respond to every single one of them. So that's my other cardinal rule, is that social media cannot be unilateral. If you're going to start a conversation, it's your job to continue the conversation. So that's what I
Conversation is
try to
not
do.
one-sided. It's
Absolutely
a
not.
two-way street.
It is 1000%.
Excellent. Dr. Dizon. So listeners, I will be adding all of these links to the show notes where you can find them. Dr. Dizon, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much. I had a great time. Thank you very much for asking me, Alicia.
Thanks, you too.
You've been listening to Working in Oncology. To ensure that you never miss an episode, subscribe to the show in your favorite podcast player. If you're listening in Apple Podcasts, we'd love for you to leave a quick rating of the show. Just tap the number of stars you think the podcast deserves. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.